There are laws written in books, and there are laws written in the hearts of men. In the air war over Europe, pilots on both sides understood one rule that rarely needed saying. You do not shoot a man in his parachute. Once a canopy opened, the fight was over for him. He was no longer a threat, only a life drifting down to captivity and, with luck, another sunrise. But some days, even the sky breaks its own code. Picture it. High over Germany, a winter sun like a dull coin behind thin cloud. A formation of American bombers staggers through bursts of black flak. One of them takes a mortal hit. Metal peels back, smoke trails, hatches blow. Then, white. Dozens of parachutes flower open, small islands of silk swaying in a cold wind. Men hang there, helpless, boots kicking at nothing, watching their burning ship fall past them. Into this fragile scene cuts the dark shape of a single fighter, sleek, fast, predatory. It does not turn away. It does not climb to rejoin the fight. Instead, it banks toward the drifting men and levels its guns. The first burst rips through a canopy. The second finds a body. The air, once loud with engines, seems to hold its breath. Shock flashes across radios. Voices break. Someone is hunting the defenseless, and for a long, terrible heartbeat, no one is close enough to stop it. Until a silver shape rolls out of the sun. A P-51 Mustang drops its nose and dives. The engines roar, gathering like a storm. At the controls is an American pilot who has just watched a line no one should cross vanish beneath tracer fire. He has no time for anger, no space for speeches, only a decision. If the code has been thrown aside, then justice will have to fall from the same sky. Richard Pete Peterson was not born a warrior. He was born a farm boy. Minnesota winters built his endurance long before flight school ever did. By the time America entered the war, he was just 19, eager, restless, and, like so many young men, driven by a mix of duty and curiosity about the vast world beyond the horizon. In 1942, he raised his hand, joined the U.S. Army Air Force, and began the long, grueling road toward earning his wings. Training forged him quickly. Endless takeoffs, stalls, spins, and recoveries. Each hour in the cockpit whittled away uncertainty until skill replaced instinct. By the time he crossed the Atlantic to join the fight, he was no longer the boy from Minnesota. He was a combat pilot in one of the most elite groups in the entire war, the 357th Fighter Group, famously known as the Yoxford Boys. Stationed in England, the 357th's airfield buzzed with legends in the making. Chuck Yeager, young and brash, would one day break the sound barrier. Clarence Bud Anderson, steady and unshakable, was already a name that demanded respect. These men weren't just pilots. They were brothers forged in the crucible of constant danger. They drank together, flew together, mourned together. And they mentored the newcomers, passing down lessons that couldn't be taught in manuals. How to sense an ambush, how to survive a dive, how to keep your nerve when tracer rounds stitch the sky. Peterson absorbed it all. He flew the sleek, newly arrived P-51 Mustang, the fighter that would soon dominate Europe's skies. On its polished nose, he painted a name that meant everything to him. Hurry home, honey. It came from the way his wife signed her letters from back home. Simple, tender words that carried across an ocean of uncertainty. Every time he strapped in, those words reminded him who he was fighting for and what he hoped to return to. Young, determined, and untested, Richard Peterson was ready for the storm that would turn him into an ace and define him forever. By 1944, the war in the skies had become a battle of endurance as much as courage. Every mission pushed deeper into Germany, and every mile meant greater risk. American B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators thundered toward targets beyond the reach of early Allied fighters, until a new machine changed everything. That machine was the North American P-51 Mustang. With its sleek fuselage, long wings, and powerful Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it was the perfect blend of speed and range. Unlike earlier escorts, the Mustang could fly from English bases all the way to Berlin and back, guarding bombers every step of the way. Its 650 caliber machine guns could shred a fighter in seconds, and its long legs meant the Luftwaffe no longer had safe havens. For the bomber crews, the first glint of silver Mustangs overhead meant one thing: hope. Across the front lines, German pilots watched the skies darken with these newcomers. Their answer remained the Messerschmitt Bf 109, a veteran of every front since 1939. It was nimble, lethal, and to its pilots, a symbol of national pride. By this stage of the war, it had become the most produced fighter in history. The backbone of a Luftwaffe stretched thin, but still deadly. Its inline engine screamed at full throttle, and in the hands of an ace, it could still outclimb and outturn nearly anything the Allies sent against it. In those cold upper altitudes, battles between Mustangs and Messerschmitts often felt less like combat and more like duels. There was respect, an unspoken fraternity among men who risked their lives alone in fragile machines. Even Adolf Galland, one of Germany's greatest aces, once said, "To shoot a man in his parachute, I should regard it as murder." That code, honored on both sides, drew a thin line between warriors and killers. But codes only matter as long as someone keeps them. And in the winter skies of 1944, Richard Peterson would soon discover what happens when one man decides not to. It began like so many missions before it: cold, gray, and deceptively calm. The morning briefing at Leaston Airfield had been routine. Escort duty for a massive formation of B-17 Flying Fortresses bound for a target deep inside Germany. Industrial centers, refineries. By now, the objectives all blurred together. The briefing officer pointed at the map, drew red lines eastward, and ended with the same warning every pilot had memorized: expect heavy flak and opposition. By mid-morning, the formation was airborne, an iron river stretching from horizon to horizon. The Mustangs flew protective arcs around the bombers, silver wings flashing against the pale sky. Each crew knew their role. The B-17s lumbered on, steady and defiant, while the P-51s danced above them like hawks, waiting for the first sign of danger. It came fast. Over enemy territory, the sky erupted. Flak bursts blossomed in black clouds, each one a spinning wall of shrapnel. The bombers held formation, engines rumbling through the storm. Then came the radio call Peterson was waiting for, sharp, urgent, unmistakable. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high." Out of the haze, dozens of Messerschmitt Bf 109s appeared, sleek, deadly, sunlight glinting off their canopies. They dove straight into the bomber stream, guns flashing. The tranquil morning shattered into chaos. Peterson rolled his Mustang and dropped into the fight. The air filled with tracer fire and smoke trails. Planes twisted, burned, vanished into the clouds. Over the intercom came frantic voices. "I'm hit! Bailing out!" Below, the horror unfolded in slow motion. White parachutes opened across the sky, first one, then 10, then 20. They floated like ghosts above the dark earth, fragile and exposed. The bomber crews, helpless now, could only pray as they drifted down through the cold air. For a moment, the battle seemed to pass them by. The fighters clashed and spiraled away, leaving those silent figures suspended between heaven and earth. High above, Peterson steadied his Mustang. He took a long breath, eyes sweeping the carnage below. The drifting parachutes, the smoke columns, the faint flashes of gunfire in the distance. He'd seen combat before, but this eerie calm between explosions felt different. It was the pause before something far worse, a quiet that carried the weight of a decision he didn't yet know he'd have to make. At first, Peterson thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Amid the drifting parachutes and scattered bombers, one lone Bf-109 was looping back, not toward the fight, but toward the falling men. It banked sharply, leveled its wings, and then streaks of orange light opened fire. For a moment, Peterson froze. His mind refused to accept what he was seeing. The tracers laced upward through the air, cutting through parachute canopies like a knife through paper. One chute folded in half, another vanished in a puff of smoke. He could almost imagine the helpless figures spinning down, hit before they ever touched the ground. He keyed his radio. Is anyone seeing this? Static, then another voice, tight with disbelief. They're shooting our guys in their chutes. There was no mistaking it now. The German wasn't just attacking, he was hunting them, circling like a hawk over wounded prey. Something inside Peterson snapped. Every pilot knew the rule, every pilot lived by it. Once a man bailed out, the fight was over. It wasn't mercy, it was decency. And now, in the thin, cold air of Germany, that rule was being trampled under boot and bullet. He looked down again, those drifting specks, his fellow Americans, utterly defenseless. And then back at the German fighter. His pulse hammered in his ears. The calm, disciplined flight leader was gone. In his place was a man filled with cold fury and purpose. Not today, he muttered. Peterson jammed the throttle forward. The Merlin engine screamed, the Mustang's nose dropping as it clawed for speed. Wind howled past the canopy. He left the formation without hesitation, slicing downward through the clouds. Ahead, the German continued his grim work, raking another parachute with cannon fire. Peterson locked his eyes on him. Every trace of doubt vanished. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about stopping a massacre. His right thumb hovered over the trigger. He didn't think of medals or orders. He didn't think of home. All he saw were the tiny white parachutes drifting like snowflakes, and the dark speck among them, turning the sky red. He would not let another one fall. Peterson closed the distance fast, his Mustang eating up the sky between him and the German. The Bf-109 twisted left, then right, still intent on its grotesque task. But the hunter had no idea that death was already streaking toward him at 400 miles an hour. Through the gun sight, Peterson saw the Messerschmitt's silhouette grow larger, the cross on its tail steady in his view. He flicked the safety off. The world narrowed to a dot, a reticle, and the faint tremor of his own heartbeat. He squeezed the trigger. 6 .50 caliber Brownings erupted in unison, the nose of Hurry Home Honey's spitting fire. Tracers leapt forward in long, glowing threads, reaching across the blue void. The first burst went wide, the next connected. Sparks flared across the 109's fuselage. Peterson adjusted slightly, walking his fire along the wing root and engine cowling. Metal peeled away. Smoke burst from the German's nose. The Bf-109 rolled violently, trailing a black ribbon behind it. Peterson stayed on his tail, his jaw set, eyes unblinking. He wasn't after a kill, not yet. He wanted the man to feel what helplessness was. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Bail out." Another short burst punctured the canopy frame. The German yanked hard on the stick, desperate to shake the Mustang. But Peterson matched every move, each twist, each dive, his propeller biting at the edge of a stall. Then it happened. The Messerschmitt lurched, engine coughing flames. The canopy flipped open, a small black shape tumbling free. The pilot had bailed. The crippled 109 pitched downward, nose first, until it vanished into the haze below, leaving behind only a thread of smoke. Above it, a white blossom unfolded, the enemy's parachute catching the wind, gentle and slow. Peterson pulled up and banked left, circling the scene. His engine purred, steady and smooth, as he watched the figure dangling beneath the canopy. The roles had reversed completely. The hunter was now the hunted, suspended in the same fragile fabric as the men he'd just murdered. For a long moment, Peterson said nothing. He could see the parachute rocking in the cold wind, sunlight flashing off the German's helmet. It was almost peaceful, like the sky itself was holding its breath. But beneath that calm, something darker stirred. This man had shown no mercy, none. And now he hung helpless, one trigger pull away from his own justice. Peterson banked again, lining up for another pass. His voice, low and steady, filled the cockpit. You wanted to kill men who couldn't fight back. He slid his thumb onto the trigger. Now you'll understand what that feels like. The sky around him was quiet now, eerily quiet. Only one parachute drifted below, rocking softly in the wind. The white silk caught the sunlight like a fragile flag of surrender. Peterson watched it sway, his gloved hand still resting on the throttle. Every instinct in him, the training, the code, the brotherhood of airmen, told him to let the man live. But then he remembered the others, the white canopies that had blossomed moments before, torn apart by gunfire, the radio cries that had gone silent mid-sentence. Mercy, he thought, had already left this sky. Peterson banked his Mustang slightly and rolled into position behind the drifting German. Through the gun sight, the scene felt almost unreal. A single man dangling in open air, unaware that the storm was circling back for him. Peterson lined up carefully, the reticle steady on the chute. He exhaled once and pressed the trigger. The 6 Brownings roared to life, their combined recoil vibrating through the cockpit. Tracers tore across the sky, ripping through the parachute canopy and the figure beneath it. Cloth shredded, fluttering like confetti in the wind. Peterson didn't stop. He fired again, long, controlled bursts, until the entire chute disintegrated into ribbons. Later, he would recall it with brutal honesty. I damn near emptied my guns on this guy. He was mincemeat by the time I got through with him. Then, silence. The last echo of gunfire faded into the cold air. The shredded remnants of silk drifted downward, twisting lazily before vanishing into the haze. The lifeless body followed, tumbling end over end until it disappeared below the cloud line. Peterson leveled out, his cockpit suddenly feeling vast and hollow. The rage that had driven him seconds ago drained away, replaced by something heavier, finality. He'd ended it, the only way he knew how. The German's rampage was over. The helpless would not die screaming today. No cheer rose on the radio. No one congratulated him. Only the faint hiss of static and the low hum of the Merlin engine filled his ears. High above the clouds, justice had been delivered. But it came at a cost. In war, there are victories that don't feel like triumphs. Only the quiet certainty that something evil has finally stopped. When Peterson finally touched down at Leiston, the sun was already slipping behind a gray horizon. The flight line was quiet, just the hiss of cooling engines and the creak of metal settling after hours in the cold. He climbed from his cockpit, face expressionless, eyes hollow from adrenaline and disbelief. No one asked right away what had happened out there. They could see it written on him. Later, in the debriefing room, the story came out in fragments. Pilots and intelligence officers leaned in as Peterson recounted the mission, the bomber formations, the parachutes, the Germans' attack, and how it ended. The room went still when he described firing on the parachute. A few men shifted uneasily in their seats. Others just nodded, grim-faced. No one wanted to say aloud what they all knew, that he had broken the unspoken rule. But no one dared call it wrong either. The German had done the unthinkable first. If justice had to come from the barrel of a gun, then perhaps that was simply what the war demanded that day. Over dinner, whispers circled through the squadron huts. Some worried that news of the event might reach German ears, that they might retaliate in kind. Others dismissed the fear with a shrug. "They won't," one pilot muttered. "They'll think twice now." Most simply kept quiet. When Peterson was asked later whether he regretted it, his answer was calm, steady, almost weary. "They had to be there to know what I saw." There was no pride in his voice, only conviction. He hadn't done it out of hatred. He'd done it to stop a massacre. By nightfall, the incident had already folded into the rhythm of war. Another mission flown, another report filed, another silence kept. But among those who had heard the story firsthand, it stayed. They understood the truth of it. That sometimes in combat, decency and survival collide, and men are forced to choose which one will live through the day. Peterson chose justice, and carried the weight of it alone. By the spring of 1945, the thunder over Europe began to fade. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, and Allied bombers roamed the skies unchallenged. For the men of the 357th Fighter Group, the war had become a series of final missions, cleanup flights, strafing runs, and victory laps through the ruins of a crumbling Reich. Major Richard Pete Peterson had survived it all. He ended the war as one of America's youngest aces, with 15.12 confirmed kills and several more destroyed on the ground. An astonishing record for a pilot barely in his 20s. The medals followed. The Silver Star for gallantry, 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and a chest full of air medals earned over countless sorties. But Peterson rarely spoke about them. To him, every ribbon represented someone who hadn't made it home. When the guns finally fell silent, he did what he'd long promised his wife in those letters signed, "Hurry home, honey." He came home. The noise, the smoke, the endless vibration of the Merlin engine, all of it was behind him. In 1946, he left the military and returned to Minnesota, exchanging the roar of aircraft for the quiet scratch of pencils on drafting paper. Peterson went back to school, earned his degree, and built a new life as an architect. A man who now shaped the world with care instead of tearing it apart. The same hands that once gripped a control stick now traced blueprints and sketched skylines. He helped design schools, civic buildings, and even a zoo. Structures meant to last, not fall from the sky. He lived a long, peaceful life, surrounded by family and friends, passing away in the year 2000 at age 77. The war had made him a legend, but in the quiet years that followed, he became something greater. Just a man who finally learned how to build. In every war, there are moments that test the boundaries between honor and survival. Richard Pete. Peterson's story is one of them. He didn't act out of vengeance or hate or orders from above. He acted because he saw the rules that gave war its last shred of humanity being torn apart before his eyes. And in that moment, he decided that justice mattered more than convention. It's easy to talk about right and wrong from the ground. Harder, perhaps, at 20,000 feet, when the world is burning below and men hang defenseless in the air. Peterson's decision to pull the trigger broke a sacred rule, but it also restored one: that innocence should not be slaughtered unchallenged. Years later, when asked about the incident, he offered no long explanations, no self-justification. He simply said, "That was the end of that." A confession, perhaps, or maybe the only closure a soldier could find after doing something he believed had to be done. His story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, morality isn't erased, it's tested. And sometimes, the hardest choice a man can make is the one that lets others live. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of courage and consequence.